Yeah, a lot of guys got used to just, parking in a spot and just kind of doing laps in it, thinking they were going to, keep coming through. And I don't think that you can't do that with these lower numbers of fish. So you need to cover as much different water, and keep moving as, it's hunting. we go through a run like, whoop, not there, let's go.
That was Brian Silvey with a nice tip this year if the numbers aren't quite where you'd like them. This is the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show today. Brian Silvey is on to shed some light on his 35-year career guiding for trout and steelhead in the Pacific Northwest. Brian describes how it all got started, including the story of when he was a kid riding back from the Steelhead River with two steelhead hanging off his BMX bike on the side of Highway 26. Plenty of funny looks and a good story there. So looking forward to that, sharing that with you today. And plenty of good tips as well on steelhead fishing and a little on trout. Before we get started, let's hear from our sponsors. Since 1977, the Fly Fishing and Tying Journal has long been considered the angler's magazine, with original how-tos and technical articles written by the best trout and steelhead anglers in the West. They are committed to sharing exceptionally written essays, fiction, poetry, and in-depth guides to fly tying and fly fishing. FTJ is one of my go-to magazines, and if you haven't checked it out recently, you can get started today by calling 1-800-541-9498 or heading over to the web at ftjangler.com. GotFishing.com is your trusted source of information with access to the world's best fishing trips. You'll never pay a dime extra for the trip you book, and in many cases, less than advertised. Find out where Got Fishing could take you by heading over to GotFishing.com today. That's GOTFishing.com, or reach them by phone at 208-630-3373. GotFishing.com, the easiest place to start your next fishing adventure. So if you're excited to chase a little chrome this year, I've got Brian Silvey from SilveysFlyFishing.com. How's it going, Brian?
Oh, doing great.
Great to have you on here. I sent out a message in the Facebook group and asked them, mentioned you were coming on, and a few people replied and had some questions about the Silvernator and some other things. We're going to dig into some steelhead and some of the stuff you do with your guiding business. But before we get there, can you talk about how you first got into fly fishing and how you brought it all into a business there?
Sure. Well, I grew up on Mount Hood, basically in Welch's. Kind of grew up fishing the Salmon River and Zigzag and the Sandy, and as a kid, you're out there dunking worms and, fishing that kind of stuff. And, it's funny, in those days, in the late 70s, early 80s, you would hook steelhead a lot with not very good tackle, and it would never work out. So, as a kid, you're like, man, I got to catch one of these things. And, I think I finally did get one on a spinner rod, but I saw some guys that were fly fishing, and I was like, man, I want to do that. And this older gentleman, it was a friend of my dad's, gave me a whole bunch of fly time stuff, which, if I look back at it now, it was just a bunch of crappy furry stuff that, had like mothballs in it. But as a kid, it was a bunch of hooks and, stuff you could just wrap stuff on hooks and try to go catch a fish. I actually tied I think it was like a woolly bugger or a woolly worm or something like that, and had my Berkeley fiberglass fly rod and, would go out there. I lived right on the Salmon River, real close to it, so I'd fish it every single day, and I think that's where I kind of got my first steelhead, and I was kind of hooked from there.
Were you near Welch's, or where was your...
Yeah, I was. I lived around, Welch's, so I was kind of in between Camp Arowana, which is Arowana Boulevard, or Wildwood Park, kind of right in between those two. I would hike that pretty much daily from one end to the other.
So near the fly fishing only bridge, right, is up above your...
Well, the fly fishing only bridge is up towards Green Canyon campgrounds.
Yeah.
But I would ride my bike up there, and like any kid would do. And I have a funny story about that. Is that it seemed like when I rode my bike, I'd always catch a steelhead or two.
Yeah.
And I'd be riding back on Highway 26 with a steelhead or two on my handlebars, and I would get the funniest looks.
Yeah.
I'd have people stop me like, "Hey kid, where'd you catch those fish?"
Nice. That's awesome.
Right.
Wow.
And I'd be like, "Oh, down at the river." I wouldn't tell them anything.
That's awesome. Right. You ride your BMX bike.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you probably don't see that anymore.
No, you don't. That is really cool. Do you remember a place called I think it was called the Slaughter Hole out on I'm not sure if it was on the Salmon.
That's on the Sandy.
Oh,
yeah.
that was on the Sandy. Yeah.
Yeah, the other one was like, I don't know. There was down at the Rock Quarry was kind of where a lot of people went down to Miller Road on the Salmon River, where they all staged up. There'd always be like, a couple hundred steelhead in there you could never catch. They were just all staging up in that pool. But now those were interesting times with all those hatchery fish.
I remember my dad talking about some of those. I never really got into that area that much, but I remember him talking about that, and Jim Teeny too. I think they would go out there and maybe do some
right
whatever, do some fishing out there. Okay, so cool. So that's where you're as a kid. And then how do you bring that into becoming a guide? How does that all happen?
Well, I started tying flies enough and kind of was selling them to some of the local stores, and then I knew Mark Bachman from his sons going to school with him, and he opened a fly fishing shop there in Welch's, and then kind of went through the school of hard knocks on how to tie commercially, and started tying flies, and then from the flies, you'd have to almost chain me to a table because, you'd have to tie so many flies, 900 to 1,200 dozen or so a summer. And after a while, you want to go fish. So we'd fish a lot, and those guys got busy doing the Deschutes, so they kind of gave us the walking trips on the Salmon River and Zigzag. And so we did these like 4-hour walking trips. We were just like junior, senior in high school, or, just out of high school, and do that in the summer. And then I did that for a while, and then I was also going to college, but then started my my own business in 1989.
Oh, in 89. Okay.
Yeah, 89.
Right on. So back in those early times when you're doing the walk-in trips, did you have any guidance, or were you just kind of out there just kind of taking people up? You knew where the fish were at and just kind of...
Yeah, they would hire, they knew we were kids kind of, to some degree, but they kind of hired us to just show them around, or just... To me, it wasn't as much guiding as it is now. Like what I feel like I do now, it was more like spotting fish, and then kind of like try to help them. But, and then I would hike around and maybe try to find some more fish. And yeah, it was more just using us to learn a section of river. And, we were kind of the spotters and
That's
maybe
cool.
a helper. I don't really consider that
Yeah.
kind of guiding like what I think I might be able to do now.
Right. Cool. Maybe if we have time, we'll get into a little bit on spotting fish. I did want to kind of turn the table a little bit and talk about the John Day just for a second, because I that's kind of been an interest to me. We were just talking off there a little bit. It sounds like it's getting a little busier and things like that. But could you take us there? I know you're just on the river. Could you take us there and talk about the John Day? And were you fishing for? Was this a bass trip?
Yeah, this was a bass trip, and I was helping out Marty and Mia Sheppard. I'll help them off and on, and Marty Sheppard helps me, and I call it guide vacation. So I'm the gov, so I just show up and kind of row a boat, and it's kind of nice to just do a different river and kind of take a break from your normal program. And the last few years, partly it's water flows on the John Day. A lot of years the river starts getting low, and not as many people have floated, but the last 2 years we've had a fair amount of water, kind of late season. It rained this whole trip we were just on, and so there's plenty of flows, and so there's lots of people out there using the John Day now. It's a great river, and it's a great kids river. Mm-hmm. The trip we did was a couple families with some kids. I had 2 6-year-old twin boys that were just a riot, and had a ball catching those bass. So it's just a great kid-friendly family river, that's not real big and scary, kind of like the Deschutes.
That's cool. Are you guys out there? Is this all a fly trip, or is this spin, or what are you guys doing?
We pretty much will do flies. Sometimes kids might want to, it's easier to do a spin, but, they can drag a fly out of the boat and catch most fish, but you try to teach them a little bit how to cast. And both the twin boys caught pretty good sized bass There's a funny story. Is one of the twins I had, his name was Dylan. His dad was helping him out of cast, and we came in this little cove, and there was a big bass in there, and he threw it in there perfectly. The fish ate it, but he wasn't able to kind of set the hook on it. And then the dad was trying to help, and then we got wrapped up in the bushes, and then I had to float over there, undo it. We floated back out. That bass was still in the vicinity, so the dad threw it in there, and we hooked this bass. I don't know how big it was, but it's probably at least 3-4 pounds. I mean, that's a big smallmouth for that river. And we were able to, Dylan kind of helped fight it and landed, and he was so excited. So that's really fun as a guide. After this long, watching kids, fight fish and just giggling and yelling, it's a whopper,
Right. What were you guys, are you guys like using woolly buggers and stuff like that?
Yeah. The water started coloring up with all the rain, but like a couple of days we were able to use poppers and kind of some dragonfly type patterns, but a lot of woolly buggers with the kids basically. You can kind of drag that along. We'll kind of maneuver the boat perfectly for them and just kind of sometimes accelerate or decelerate the fly for them.
Gotcha. Are you guys doing just a dry lines with split shot, or are you doing a sinking line?
No. It's just like a beadhead woolly bugger is probably the best, because it kind of sinks a little, but doesn't get in the big boulders. But if you let it sink a little, it'll get down where you want it, but not get hung up too much. I've tied some heavier stuff to kind of get down off those deep walls, but it's too hard for most people to kind of deal with. And sink tips you'll have some guys that are maybe a little bit better anglers might fish that kind of stuff, but we're just fishing those little edges and, little grassy banks with some rocks and that kind of stuff.
So this is not rocket science. It's pretty easy to find and hook into fish.
Yeah, it's I call it. It's not a fishing trip. It's a catching trip.
What's a typical trip down there?
Well, this one is, since the weather was pretty cold and rainy, I mean, you're probably only getting maybe 20, 30 fish, which is kind of slow, per person kind of thing. Where you go on like when the water warms up quite a bit and it drops down to 400 or 500 CFS instead of being about 2,500. I mean, it's a 50 to 100 fish a day kind of deal. But I mean, they're all different sizes. Sometimes they're a bunch of little guys, and then you might get some 8, 10 inchers, and then, you might get some that are 12 to 15, and then who knows, you might hook one that's 18, 22, So it's like I said, it's more of a numbers thing, and a lot of times poppers and foam bugs, and, it's kind of fun to watch those bass smash
that is awesome.
the top water. So.
What would be a good foam, or what do you use there?
Well, I used to have a fly called a dragon popper that was kind of an in-between a damsel and a dragon that kind of had a little popper head that Umpqua feather merchants used to tie. And there's still a few shops that have that. Yeah. Because the big hatch on the John Day is later in the season you'll get dragonflies and damsels, and the bass will jump in the riffles. Like, it's the craziest thing you'll ever see.
So that's not on right now. That's a little bit like, what is that?
No, it's too cold. Right. It's like temperature, just like a salmon fly hatch.
Gotcha.
It's a water temperature thing, and it's still a little cold for it. But any popper, I mean, a little frog pattern. But you don't want to use too small a one. I'll tell you that, because they'll inhale that thing. So like a medium-sized largemouth popper. So that way they don't suck it in too far, because it'll be nothing but a nightmare trying to get it out of them without killing them. So.
What's the, take us to the river. What's the river? Is it like an easy float, pretty flat? Are there any, any tricky spots?
There is a couple tricky spots. So most floats are very easy. I mean, you got Burnt Ranch Rapids, which at certain flows, we went through that kind of area, and it was pretty easy. But when it gets lower, that gets hard. And then Clarno Rapids, there's certain flows you can't really even make it through there. The rest of the river is really, really easy, especially the lower river. Yeah. They got that down at Cottonwood. They have that big state park now, and that's being used a lot. And that whole area there's walking and wading and trails. I watch people walk way down there sometimes. So very friendly, usable river.
Gotcha. if you didn't have a boat, that new Cottonwood area is a pretty good area to go if you could for access.
Oh, sure. That's probably your easiest, probably the best. Yeah,
Gotcha.
No doubt.
Okay, cool. And you guys took, do you do the drift boats down through that section?
Yeah, at this flow you can use a drift boat. Yeah, if you're a decent enough oarsman, not hitting too many rocks. But a raft is probably more feasible for most people, especially when it gets lower.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Yeah, I just wanted to get a taste of that. I had Mia and Marty. They were on, I think it was episode 76 a while back, and we talked a little bit about the John Day, talked a little bit about, a little bit of this and that. But it's interesting because, you mentioned the river's busier. I wonder, doing this podcast, because this is going to go out, to thousands. I don't know how many thousands of people will see this, in the long term. But, people are going to hear this, right? And they're going to be like, oh, the John Day. And I wonder how much influence I had since that, 2 years ago when I interviewed Mia and Marty. But what's your take on that? Because you're a guide as well, right? You're getting people out to these areas, with the pressure.
Right. I think right now, is the way the world is, I think people just want to get away. I mean, I don't blame them. So the Deschutes has been, on the weekends, have been kind of busy, with just people camping and floating and fishing too. And I think that's another thing. I mean, what a great way to escape with your family.
Yeah.
Kind of on any river right now, just kind of decompress and not watch the news, really. So, that's kind of a nice thing, and I think a lot of people are taking advantage of that, would be my guess too.
Yeah.
So I mean, a lot of our rivers are being overused sometimes, but it's good and bad. I hope people respect the rivers that they're out there floating, either the Deschutes or the Sandy or the John Day, and that way when we need people to fight for them, hopefully they'll fight with us. Is the way I look at it. When there's problems, hopefully they'll be the ones to step up and say, hey, yeah, we need to do something about this. So
that's right. So when you see all those people, lots of more people on the river, you don't feel like, oh, I'm kind of contributing to this over pressured rivers. You just feel like it's probably going to be a good thing in the long term. Well,
yeah, I mean, you don't like it as a guide at times, but you all need to get along, and you're all trying to do the same thing. None of us own it. I mean, is what I'm a guide, but I don't own this river. Like, if you're in a spot, I'm going somewhere else, but give me some space too. Don't come in where I'm at. I'm trying to do my job, but no, I always try to get along with the public and be super friendly and helpful in any way I can if they don't know where they're going or where they want to camp, or you try to help them out, because then, that way we're kind of an ambassador of what river we're on, instead of going, oh, those guides, they're always, racing us around or, causing problems. It's like, no, we're here to help if we can. So.
Exactly. No, that's cool. Who are some of your, when you think about mentors, people you mentioned Mark Bachman. I think that's an interesting one, because Mark, I think maybe he's looked at as kind of a little rough around the edges to some people that maybe don't know him. What's your take on that? And then who are some of your mentors to get you going?
Well, sure. I mean, I knew Mark since I was in the 4th grade, so it was just normal for me.
What do you think with Mark? Because I have an interesting story, because I didn't know Mark that well for years and years. I kind of knew of him, right? But I finally, when I did the podcast, because we did a podcast with him, and we went out on the river, and he took me out. We had a full day on the Sandy, and at the end of the trip, I was like, Mark, I think it's pretty cool, because all these years I didn't really know you, and I think we've kind of created a friendship, And so I got to know him, I got to know him a little bit, and that whole thing that I thought about him being a little bit rough, it was like, well, he's a good guy. So what do you think what do they get wrong about Mark to start off?
Yeah, just a little rough around the edges, but his knowledge of wherever he's at is amazing. I mean, he's been on these rivers for a long time, since the 60s, and he's very knowledgeable about the geology and just the historical facts of the river that sometimes I'm not always good at, but for me, Mark was always great. I have a great story. The first time I really tied a bunch of flies for Mark for the shop were some brookstones. It was kind of like going to be my job to tie all the brookstones, and at that time there wasn't a lot of commercial companies tying flies. I mean, Umpqua was there, but it wasn't, most shops had their own kind of unique patterns and stuff like that. And so me and his sons would tie a lot of the flies. And so I got this order of Brookstones that was, like 250 dozen or something like that. And and I'm like, oh, great, here we go. And so I tied them, and I tied like, I don't know, 15, 20 dozen, and I took them in to kind of get paid a little bit. And Mark in his voice was like, I'm not buying those. Those aren't tied right. And I'm like, oh, no, now what do I do? And so I had to shred all those. But he was right. They were kind of too skinny, and they weren't right. And, and he kind of pointed me in the right direction, like, no, you need to do this. And, to me, Mark, gave me my chance and kind of guiding and made me a pretty good fly tire because they had to be a certain way. And I saw, like, okay, they need to be, steelhead fly needs to be tied this way, and a stone fly needs to be tied this particular way. And, you got to be picky with it because it's going to have, you're selling it to your customers and they need to be right. And so after that, I was always very particular on how I tied a fly or how a fly should be tied. So that's cool. I kind of took that to heart and I appreciate that he did that, even though I hated him when, when that happened, because I had to shred all those and start over.
Who were any other mentors along the way for you?
Well, another guy that another gentleman, his name's Steve Gobin. He's a Tuolip Indian. He's in Trey Combs' book.
Oh, cool.
He's a very amazing spey fly tire. Like tying spey flies, full dress Atlantic salmon flies. But he tied just beautiful spey flies, and I got to guide him quite a bit for a while there, and we would trade flies. He liked mine, I liked his, and he would he would show up with a box of flies like I tied, and I would always show up with like his kind of style, and I learned a lot from him because he'd hang out in my house and we would tie flies, him and his wife Karen. I mean, there's others from books, Dave McNeese, John Shuey, those types. I always looked at those guys' patterns, and but after a while, you kind of get your own style, I guess. I mean, anymore, I tie it my way.
Exactly. I was gonna say, when did the Silvernator? When did that come to be?
Well, the Silvernator is kind of a transformation from another fly, which was a tandem tube fly. It was a pattern that were articulated leech pattern. Instead of tying it with a shank and a braided type line, which took a long time to kind of rig up, I tied it with two different tubes and a loop knot. And it's kind of a crazy pattern, but it's a really great fly, and so it's easy to cast, so your clients can cast it. That fly, the Silvinator, came by shrinking that down to fish on the John Day or the Deschutes or the Sandy when it's really low water, just to tie a leech pattern that's super easy to cast but sinks really well, and then it's a total guide fly where it takes no time to tie, where you can crank those out really, really fast.
And what's your favorite color for that fly, and then why does it sink so fast?
Yeah, the less material, the better. A lot of times with flies, you think sometimes you put certain materials that, this is going to help, get it down, but a lot of times it doesn't. It floats a little more. So it's basically rabbit, a hackle, and some ostrich on the edges on a tube, and it has a brass bead on it, a pretty good sized brass bead, so it sinks pretty fast. And it has a lot of action for being how small it is. It's probably about 2 inches, maybe, 2.5 would be the biggest I would tie it. It's just that perfect all-around length. But it's, like I said, it doesn't have enough materials to absorb enough water, so it's easy to get out of the water and cast. You can cast it on a floating line. It really kind of came around on the John Day for steelhead is where it really kind of was our best fly for a while there, but I started using it everywhere. And the best color is probably black and blue is probably my favorite, but my second best would be orange and red.
Yep. And I had that John Sherrill in the Facebook group was asking about for summers. So whether you can use it for summers and what's your favorite color for summers?
Yeah, well, the favorite color for summers is that it's a purple and pink one. That's always, purple's always a really good color. But later in the fall, those fall fish, maybe late October, November, seem like black and blue with the water temperature seems to work a little better. I like the purple and pink kind of the early season and black and blue. But I can say that, somebody will go catch one on black and blue early season and get one on a purple and pink late season.
I mentioned this before, but George Cook, I had him on and asked him what his fly box looked like, and he said it's pretty much it's all red. It's mostly reds.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's that's
right.
Pretty cool. I mean, not everybody has the same looking. I mean, what does your box look like if you open up your steelhead box or your summer steelhead box?
Oh, well, my summer steelhead box is usually a lot of traditional wet flies since I'm on the Deschutes. So, and I'm kind of an old school guy. I mean, there's still greenbutt skunks in there tied on, like a gold hook. I love those, certain times of year. But, I like golden demons and little muddlers and blue charms. And to me, like, you can't beat those traditional flies. Like, they work.
Yeah, they
you
do.
can't reinvent the wheel. Where some of the things needed to be changed was more winter steelhead flies. That was pretty new, and leeches can be, changed a little bit. It's, like to me, a sylvanator is just I reinvented an egg sucking leech, basically.
Oh, right.
That's about it.
Yeah, that's a great.
It's not something I really want to be known for, but it's a great fly, though. I mean, you know.
Yeah, the egg sucker
you have to
works.
take it where you get it, I guess.
Exactly. No, it's cool. So, what gets you more fired up, summers or winter steelhead fishing?
That's a tough one. To me, winter, because it's tough.
Yeah.
I mean, seems like impossible sometimes, and then you finally get one of those chrome beauties. You're just like, wow, we did it. It's awesome.
So you're not burnt out on the. I've had a few guests, winter steelhead, just steelhead fishermen. They were like, man, I think Shuey was one of them. I think he was like, you know what? I'm out bird hunting during. I'm not even fishing.
Yeah.
I mean, do you?
Right. I've talked to him a few times, and he's usually bird hunting.
Exactly. Do you feel that the cold? You're still good with the cold? Those rainy, wet, kind of half snowy days?
I love that stuff. I mean, it just reminds me of just growing up over. Since I live in Maupin, I mean, I kind of miss, the downpours of Welch's and some of that stuff sometimes, and now it just feels like, we're gonna get them.
Yeah. No kidding.
No, I'm not burnt out on it at all. I mean, like, to me, this is like I was meant to be like a steelhead guide.
That's cool.
Like, it's my favorite. Like, I love it. And I mean, after 30 some odd years, I'm still kind of hungry for it.
Exactly.
I still love it.
Well, you're in a cool place because you get in Maupin, you only have to worry about 10 inches of rain a year. So you kind of get the dry, right? You're in the desert.
Right. Oh yeah. No, I'll call home a lot of times after a trip of just being drenched, just talk to the family. I'm like, has it been raining over there? Like, no, not at all. I'm like, unbelievable. I just spent 3 days of solid downpour, and like, oh no, it hasn't rained much over here. So.
What would you tell somebody if they were, we're getting close to summer steelhead, it's only, not too far off. I mean, somebody's over there, they're struggling. Maybe they even haven't caught a summer steelhead yet. They're going over there and they're just, what sort of tips, we give them a couple of tips to help them find a fish or maybe hook their first fish?
Sure. Well, a lot of it, especially the early season, comes down to how hot the weather is and water temperature. I mean, some guys are really key on water temperatures. Other guys have no clue, no idea that it affects things so much. So I would tell people that, if it's really hot out, especially on the Deschutes, it's going to be that early morning's probably going to be your best shot, and probably more of the faster water, the faster riffle or bouldery, pretty good current, at least where it'll swing a fly, but you want to head for that, just be like trout fishing. That's why I always correlate the two between trout and steelhead. They're pretty closely related, so a lot of your trout are going to be right up in the riffles and that fast water, and you want to swing those, but you want to be out there at first light. And I always tell people it's really hard when you haven't caught one to have confidence in what you're doing, and it could be really, really hard on your mind on like, am I doing this right, or what am I doing wrong, or there's just none here, or you just keep going round and round and round, and it takes time now, especially with the fish counts not being what they used to be, and being a lot more people at times, and you just gotta be the optimist and go, it's going to be the next cast. It's going to be the next cast. I mean, I tell people I feel like sometimes I'm just the motivational speaker. I've just got to keep people motivated, because sometimes people are like, there's nothing in here. I'm like, come on, see that rock down there? There could be one right by that rock. So yeah, you got to keep people motivated.
How do you do that on days where maybe, it is a struggle, like this year, maybe the runs well, I guess just think of that. You have a day out there where the fishing's just not good, and steelhead fishing, they're out there. I mean, what's your, as a guide, how do you make that a good trip?
Well, I'm always the type to tell people one a day is a good day. I mean, we hook one, we get a grab, that's a great day. And so when you get people in that mode, they're just looking for the one. And then I call it hunting. To me, it's hunting. It's not just swinging flies here. We're just hunting. And so we're just hunting along. Sorry, my dog.
No problem. Well, what's his name or her name?
That's Keystone. He's a 14-year-old yellow lab.
Oh, cool.
He hardly ever barks, but there's somebody outside, I think.
Oh, yeah, no worries.
But it's just hunting to me, and so I'll just keep covering water. I fish harder when there's less fish around. I just fish harder.
Yeah, just go for it.
Just cover more water. Cover every kind of water you can cover. Riffles, bouldery, slow water, soft water, everything. And eventually you'll find one. I mean, it just takes more water to fish.
There you go. So don't necessarily, if it's maybe a little slow, don't necessarily stay in that one spot and cover that big run. Maybe just keep moving and covering.
Yeah, a lot of guys got used to just, parking in a spot and just kind of doing laps in it, thinking they were going to, keep coming through. And I don't think that you can't do that with these lower numbers of fish. So you need to cover as much different water, and keep moving as, it's hunting. we go through a run like, whoop, not there, let's go.
Exactly.
And then, there's times you need to take breaks in the middle of the day, if it's too hot or, just not, you got to take a break. It's supposed to be fun. I mean, I'll hunt pretty hard until a certain point, and then it's like, all right, let's take a break for a little while. Let's enjoy this. Let's have some fun, just hang out, talk, have lunch, chill out for a little while, and maybe talk about some leaders and flies and that kind of stuff. And I do a lot of teaching. I think that's important, is to teach people how to steelhead fish, how I would do it. And so sometimes when it's slow, that we're doing a lot of that, working on casting, and especially spey casting. We're all still learning, I call it. I'm still learning.
And now a quick word from our sponsors. GotFishing.com, a boutique booking agency for fishing adventures around the world. Got Fishing is unique in working with a small hand-selected group of outfitters from around the world that are known for providing an experience that is second to none. Got Fishing can be your trusted source of information with access to the world's best fishing trips. Their sole purpose is to help you plan the most authentic fishing adventure while making sure it fits within your budget. The beauty is that everything they do is 100% free. You will never pay a dime extra for your trip, and in many cases, less than advertised. I can attest personally to the service that Got Fishing provides, as they have been working with me closely to set my first trip to the Yucatan for saltwater. They have taken care of all the important details and allowed me to avoid worrying about any of the complications. I know Brian and the crew have you covered at Got Fishing. Whether you need a fishing consultant, travel consultant, gear pro, or the like, they have you covered. With top-of-the-line outfitters they represent around the world, they are confident they have just the right trip for you. You can give them a call at 208-630-3373 or head over to gotfishing.com to get started today. Let Got Fishing help you plan the fishing trip you've been dreaming about. That's gotfishing.com. I forget that in the center are rivers and fish unspoken for. That there are valleys, the strata of which we lower into perhaps in the hollow between breaths. In the tiny pause between the rise of summer and its departure, I nearly forget the long sieve of winter, the absence, the fractional glimpses of light. Dear one, I will go without speaking. Ablaze, keep me until I disappear. That was a poem by Molly Dam in the summer edition of the Fly Fishing and Tying Journal. On top of some great poetry, as you hear here, FTJ is jam-packed with another round of great articles in diverse departments. Joseph Rosano is back again, provides another classic steelhead lesson for everyone. We hear from Garrett Lesko in a stacking deer hair frenzy. Find out about striped bass from Angelo Peloso. And hear from Dave McNeese on Singing the Blues of Material Dying. Lots of additional articles in the summer edition, including an editor's interview with yours truly about how I became a fly fishing podcaster. Craig did a really good job with this one, so I'm pretty proud to be
in this edition. I believe I have found the perfect sponsor for the show. It would be really great if you can support FTJ by heading over to ftjangler.com and subscribing so you don't miss any of the tips, tricks, and stories in the next issue. That's ftjangler.com to get started today. And tell Craig and the crew out there you heard about the magazine from the podcast, and I'll find a way to put something extra special together for you. Okay, back to the show.
What was your transition to spey like? Because I know you probably were there before with the single-handed rods. What was that like for you?
Well, at first, I kind of fought it because some of the first spey rods I saw were like 15, 16 foot, like 10, 11 weights. And I'm like, who's going to use this for like a 6-7 pound Deschutes fish? You know, I thought this is ridiculous.
So were guys using it? Were guys doing the
Well, John Hazel was the first one I really saw out there with like a 15 foot 10 weight Sage when they first kind of came out with that rod. I started, it's probably like 88, 89 with the, I think, or maybe even 90 with that 9140 that Sage came out with. It was the first kind of rod that was more of a steelhead rod for us. And then they came out with the 7136, which was a little better for the Deschutes, you know, a little smaller rod. And, but yeah, there wasn't lines. Like, we had to, at least Skagit lines, you had to make your own. For floating lines, there was a triangle taper. It was a Lee Wolf line that we'd use, but it was a 70-foot taper line. So it took a while to kind of get good at, you know, throwing a 70 to, 100-foot line. Nowadays, everything's dialed down where it's really easy for somebody to just step right into a spey rod and throw a Scandi or a Skagit that matches every rod very well and just get after it. You know, within a short period of time, they're throwing the head really well or even shooting line really quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's percentage of people on your trips are using single hand for steelhead versus two-handed?
Zero.
Not even a percent anymore.
Not anymore. I mean, it used to be there were, you know, I would always let guys use their single-hand rods, you know, in the early 90s, and then I'm like, hey, let's try this spey rod, you know, and it's a lot easier here where we're trying to roll cast, and it just opened up more water for guiding. So you know, you kind of really wanted to do it because it just gave you more options then. Because with the single-handed rod, you had to just fish certain types of water, you know, where they had some backcasting room, and you know, the Deschutes doesn't have a lot of those. So, you know, the spey rod had to come into play. And so when the 6126, you know, like a 12.5-foot 6-weight came around, that was like the ultimate Deschutes rod and floating line and everything. And so it was in my boat. I had at least 2 of them all the time in my boat. But I would do it after lunch maybe, or just go, hey, you know, I know you're struggling, but just roll this thing out. I would just put it in their hand and just try it for a minette. And they're like, wow, this is way easier. Yeah. So
that's cool.
What that's
line,
what it came about.
What line do you use for that 12.5-foot 6-weight? What line do you? I think you use Scientific Anglers, right? Or
Yeah. I'm kind of helping Scientific Angler with some lines and kind of designing some stuff. So it's a grain window. This is where it gets confusing for some people. It's all grain window or grain sized lines. Not like a trout rod where a 5-weight rod throws a 5-weight line. Those, like a 5-weight line is grain weighted to match that 5-weight rod. A spey rod is not quite dialed in like that, but they're starting to get better at getting those grain windows smaller for these spey rods. So a 6-weight usually would throw like a 390 grain Scandi, maybe a 420 grain on the heaviest. But a 390 is what I would look for most 6-weights. And that would be most Scandi lines would have that.
Okay, so you just go pick up any Scandi line, Scientific Angler. What is their line they have that would be good for the Deschutes?
They have a Scandi. It's just called a Scandi line. It's a most of them are like 30, 31 feet in length. And the cool thing with the Scientific Angler, when John Hazel was the one who was really working on that line, and I just kind of helped out because I was just starting with SA. But we kind of tried to design that one where you didn't really need a poly leader because a lot of people don't know what those are either. And so we really tried to make it where it was a line that would work with either a poly or a mono leader. And it works really great with a mono leader too. So that was, And we wanted one that like everybody could turn over. Like it would turn over no matter what kind of cast you would throw. As a guide, you want no matter what, I don't care how far somebody can throw it, but you want the fly to turn over every time. And if it doesn't turn over, it's not going to swing very well. So that's what we worked hard on that line, is to make sure it turned over really with almost any casting stroke, and then be simplified where you can just put a 12-foot mono leader and it would cast great. So that's kind of the aspects of that line.
What's the difference between a mono leader and a poly leader?
Mono leader is just like any type of mono leader, which is a nylon. It's like you'd use for trout or
right.
Or tippet or any of that kind of stuff. A poly leader was something that helped a lot with these Scandi lines. Back when the Scandi line was really going in Europe, those guys would use like 22 to 24 foot leaders, a mono leader, just to get an anchor.
Yeah.
And which for most of us, that's a long mono leader not to tangle up.
Yeah, it is.
and it just seems ridiculous, but you needed that much to try to get an anchor. So a poly leader is a mono core with kind of a plastic coating on it, and it either comes in a floating or kind of an intermediate or kind of a hover type line with, it has that plastic coating, but you can do that in like a 14-foot length or a 10-foot length and get that same kind of anchor or stick to the water that you do with that 22-foot leader, which I didn't really care for.
Gotcha. Yep. Okay.
So it made that a whole process a lot easier for the Scandi line also. So.
Yeah. So this summer for your setup for summer steelhead is going to be, like you said, the 12.5-foot 6-weight with that Scandi Scientific Anglers and a poly leader or something like that on, or do you?
Either a poly leader if you're used to using those, and with a poly leader it has a loop at the end, and then you just put I put 10-pound tippet on there, whatever you like to use, and then 3-4 feet, and you just tie a fly on. So it's pretty easy, just to loop the loop and then tie a fly on. With a mono leader, a lot of times you might buy like a 12-foot tapered leader, and sometimes I'll add 10 pound of a few feet, so that way if you get any wind knots down there, you can just change that out. But you could just tie it right to the tapered leader and go fish also.
Yeah, there you go. And what about dry flies for steelhead? Do you do any of that out there?
I used to do a lot of that, especially when the October caddis start bouncing around. I mean, I caught quite a few steelhead when I was growing up, when I was talking about the Berkeley rod and stuff, swinging like October caddis. I can remember I caught one actually on a dead drifted dry fly on the Salmon River because I didn't really understand how that whole skating thing works. So I was just throwing it like a dry fly and actually landed the steelhead on a October cat, more like a sofa pillow.
Oh, right.
I used to fish a lot of like a skater and a wet fly. Back in the day, we'd always fish two flies. But with the pressure nowadays and the kind of lack of fish, sometimes the conditions are not as easy to catch them on skaters. There's times you can do it. I don't do it as much.
Yeah.
It's really fun. And if you really want to learn a spot, like a run that you fish a lot, you'll learn so much by fishing a skater when it comes across where it'll hesitate or where it kind of does some weird movement. That's what your wet fly is doing too. And you learn a lot about a run on fishing a skater.
Oh, yeah.
It's really interesting to watch it.
Exactly. So, cool. If you had two go-to flies, is it the Silvernator? Is that always one of your go-tos?
For summer steelhead?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the middle of the day, it's a lot of times I'm doing day trips and guys have one day to, fish the Deschutes. So we'll fish sink tips, not real heavy, not like we're fishing T14 and dredging or anything. We're fishing medium weight sink tips, but that Silvernator is a great one to fish in those same conditions because it'll sink pretty good, but you can use a light sink tip and not get hung up too much. So yeah, Silvernator is a good one for the low, when the sun's on the water. And then the low light conditions, I mean, one of my favorites is probably a number 6 little natural muddler. I mean, that's one of my favorite flies, but there's others, there's, a Golden Demon. Like I said, I like a lot of those old school patterns, and or a Max Canyon.
Yep. There you go. There you go.
There you go. I've caught lots of fish on a Max Canyon.
Yep.
So,
they awesome. Yeah. Throw back to my pops. Yeah. The old orange and black. Yep. We've talked about this a little bit, just fishing in the daytime. That's always been a kind of a funny topic, because I think, some people think about it as kick back and take a break, but you're fishing in the daytime with your clients. Can you break us down, like what you're using, the sink tip line, and then, exactly how you find fish? Are you hitting only certain spots depending on the sun?
Right. Yeah. The sun angles on the Deschutes, since it pretty much flows north, are really important, because especially in a canyon where it makes big turns, and sometimes it's in their eyes, which, now I can say this, and I've seen it happen where people catch them on a floating line, the sun's in their eyes. You shouldn't be fishing it, and then like, oh, I got one. And you're like, oh, unbelievable. You shouldn't have caught one there. But I always tell people this too. We made up all the rules, and the Steelhead never read the rule book. So I can tell you this stuff, and all the rules will be broken.
That's right.
I look for sun angles. I want it behind them or off to the side. I don't really like it in their eyes. So I will skip a spot, because I just lose total confidence in a place where it's in their eyes, even if it's a sink tip. Sink tips, I'll fish in them, once the sun really gets out, and that's like the afternoon. I'll still fish floaters, because a lot of times I can find angles of the sun I still like with a floating line.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be till 10, 11 o'clock, and then finally we might change over to sink tips. But it's usually, like I said, a light tip, a flow tip, a mow tip, those lighter tips.
Yep.
That are only like 7.5 sink. Some guys will use some heavier stuff if they know the spot that it won't get hung up as much. If you're not knowledgeable about the run you're fishing, I would recommend not going too heavy.
Mm-hmm.
As you become more familiar with it, then you might be able to use T11. But nothing. It's not like I'm trying to get down like in the winter or slow the fly down. I'm just trying to put it down so they don't have to look up.
Yep.
That's my thinking of it.
Yep.
But it's always up to the client. Some guys don't want to fish, sink tips that much. They just want to fish floaters. But yeah, we'll try to fish tips till at least maybe 1, 2 o'clock, and then take a break, and then maybe hit it hard in the evening again.
Yep. Gotcha. So that's the main thing, is just finding that angle so the sun's not there, and if you can do that. And are you guys doing mostly drift boat trips on your day trips?
Yeah. I'm using all drift boat.
Yeah. So you're just
floating.
You're just putting it. Are you doing kind of the middle section, or are you doing the lower river too?
I do the lower. So I do a lot of day trips from like Pine Tree to Max, and then all of September and first half of October is just back-to-back camp trips.
Oh yeah, you do. Yeah, you got all the camp and stuff. So
right, I'm doing laps, I call it, but I just put in, do the 3-4 day, go to the Dalles, reshop, put back in.
Are you doing? Is that you? Are you doing the trips like kind of the everything, or do you have somebody doing like a gear boat and all that stuff?
Oh, I have a gear boat.
Yeah. You got it. It seems like
I've gotten. It's either you got smarter or lazier. I feel like I've gotten smarter. I don't want to do all that.
No, I know. Is there anybody out there still doing? Do you see much of that are doing, kind of a one
self-guided kind of trips? Not well. Yeah, there's a few where you do the kind of safari trip, just fishing hard, throw a cot down, and a run, and I mean that still can be fun, but it's busy enough that can be hard. You can end up in places like, well, I think I can put a cod here. So I like to have the luxury of camp, and that's nice to show up to that and have it all done and have everything ready for clients who are like, wow, look at this. This is great, Yeah. So look, we have a nice run right here to fish. I'm
exactly.
Like, yeah, this is why we have our gear guy. he's doing all the hard work.
That's right. That's right. It's cool. Any other resources, if somebody wanted to learn, if they weren't going out with you and they wanted to just, again, that person that's kind of trying to find that first steelhead, where would you direct them? Any like books, magazines, online resources?
Well, Deck Hogan's book is really good, The Passion of Steelhead. He talks a lot about different angles and how fish come after the fly. I mean, that's a great resource. My resource was always Trey Combs' books. I had his first book. That's how I really got good at tying flies. I tied all the flies that he had in that. It was the first book I saw that had all the color plate, of colors. Because before that, it was always pen and ink, drawings almost. So, But Trey Combs' second book is a great book and it gives history of rivers and stuff, but it talks different rivers and different techniques. There's always YouTube too. I mean, there's some actually great videos and a lot of killer fly tying videos now. There's a lot of great tires out there that people never even heard of that I even run into. I'm like, wow, this guy's really good.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that, and even Instagram. I mean, which sounds funny, but there's guys that do videos on that all the time that are fantastic. Spey tires and steelhead fly tires.
Yep.
So it's really cool to see all that.
Yeah, it has been kind of, but it is kind of cool to be able to connect around the world, right? I mean, it literally is easy. You can see everywhere, Atlantic salmon, whatever you want, right?
Right. Well, it was during the whole lockdown. I got kind of hooked into watching all those when, you weren't supposed to go anywhere. I was just working around my ranch here and then tying some flies in the evening or watching some of these guys tie. I'm like, man, these guys are good.
Yeah. So, yeah. How did we're in still in the COVID thing. How did, I mean, we're still in it, but it's been let down a little bit. How has that been for, I mean, were you like shut down completely? How did all that work?
Oh yeah. We were shut down pretty much for guiding for almost 2.5, 3 months.
2.5, 3 months, right?
No guiding.
Yep. No guiding.
It was kind of hard. I missed the whole spring steelhead and then kind of early salmon fly, Deschutes trout, missed a lot of stuff, but you got to do what you got to do and to kind of be safe for your family and keep others safe, I guess. It's lightened up now and people are wanting to get out. So it's still a little weird, but everybody's trying to do their social distancing and be protective of each other. We're doing our best to keep working as guides, but it's still weird.
It is. Are you wearing you got to wear a mask out there, right?
Yeah, well, I've been doing it in the boats, I mean, we're trying to keep it separate, like when you're out fishing, it seems kind of silly because I can keep away from people. I mean, I've been wearing a buff like I do. Some people, we were wearing masks, and having people drive down to boat ramps and trying to do the right thing or do what we've been told is what we should do. But it's still weird.
Yeah, it is.
And it's kind of up to the people. I've been leaving it up to them.
Yeah, that's a good way. Yeah.
On how they feel about it and what they want to do.
Sure,
because you want them to feel safe and have fun, and so that's the most important thing.
Yeah. Well, let's before we get out here, let's jump just quickly into some winter steelhead a little bit. And it sounds like that you've been on the Sandy for a long time. Any quick tips for winter steelhead? I mean, it's definitely a different game. And actually Marty, he talked a little bit about winter fishing over there. But what do you tell somebody? Or when you're out there, you're taking a newbie out for a winter steelhead trip. What's the expectations and how does that day look?
Well, the expectations are if we get one a day is a good day, like anything. But it's always funny when you take a beginner. Sometimes your expectations are really low. You're just like, hey, we're just going to pull into a spot, just learn how to do this a little bit, kind of get the rhythm of things. You're not even looking to swing. You're just saying, let's just cast for a little while, just kind of get the hang of this before we get too carried away. The main thing is just keeping it simple for somebody new, like the head out maybe, just find an easy spot, just like I said, to cast. But inevitably, they always will hook one. It's so funny. I had some beginners this year. One guy hooked 3 fish.
Wow.
And never even, I told him he might as well quit now, like, because it was unbelievable. But the winter steelhead, it's all about conditions, similar to summer, but it's all about water levels. And so you want to hit those fresh kind of rises after it's risen pretty high maybe and it's dropping down. It comes back to water temperature again. The water's warmer. The Sandy average is about 39 degrees most of the time. And so when the water's up from some rains, you're getting maybe that 42, maybe even 43 degree water, where those winter fish are going to be a lot more active to a fly. And so then it's kind of hitting the right kind of water. It's back to hunting again. But with the beginner, like I said, I'll just keep it simple and then just put them in water where they don't have to throw it very far, and then work on trying to slow the fly down. That's what I think is important with winter fish. It's not always deeper. It just needs to be slower sometimes because the water is so much colder that they're not as active. So sometimes we're not fishing the same waters you'd fish for summer steelhead. It's some of that slower, maybe tail out or middle of the run, kind of real methodical, slow water, where it's kind of even pace all the way through.
Yeah. How do you slow? So other than finding the right water, how else do you slow that fly down?
Well, mending or casting angles are always important, kind of with any steelheading, summer or winter.
Yeah.
But the angle sometimes is a little more across, just to give the fly time to get a little deeper and help it slow it down. So sometimes I'm mending a lot more, and I'll throw one big mend, and then it's a lot of, like, I call it ruddering, just kind of ruddering the fly, just lifting that end right off the rod tip, just kind of keeping that going a little bit slower as it starts coming across. Like, it depends on the water, but I do a lot of ruddering. And then there's lines. There's some of these 3D lines, or like a line that I helped out with, which was called a fist, which is a floating intermediate with a built-in sink tip. So it kind of slows the fly down, getting below that surface kind of tension or surface currents that are going all over the place. You can break that surface, then it'll go a lot slower all by itself without a lot of mending or a lot of hassle. So that line's become kind of important for winter steelheading. But, it's just getting that fly slower. Like I said, one year I tried to use a 10 weight, 15-foot 10 weight, and I fished sink tips up to like 500 grains. I had like teeny lines that I made for a scadget head, basically. And I was just dredging because I was watching all these guys fishing gear, catching all these fish. And I really didn't catch any more fish. Fishing all that heavy sink tips and heavy flies. I caught some, but it was more of a hassle. And I thought, man, I think I'm missing some of these fish in the higher flows that are in close. When the water's up, they're cruising along the edges. They're not out in that heavy current. They're on those inside seams and those little depressions or maybe those rocks. So I'm actually fishing, I think, lighter sometimes now than I ever did, and swinging in closer, at least the first time through. And I'll do that a lot, where I'll fish a run real light kind of first time through. And then if we got time, I'll come back through with something totally different, a little bit heavier fly, a little heavier sink tip, and then try to, maybe slow it down or get it down a little more out a little farther after we went through. But sometimes that first time through with that light stuff, that's when we hook them.
Yep. Especially
in that off-colored water, a little more glacial colored and kind of higher flows. That's the prime stuff. So we're constantly, as guides, looking at water flows. I hardly ever do in the summer, but in the winter, you're just like on your phone looking at those flows. Like, oh, it's cresting. Oh, tomorrow, maybe the next day might be it.
Right. Is that how you do it with clients when people, probably some are setting up trips in advance, or are you kind of guiding it based on flows?
Well, we set up, some people need to schedule trips, in advance, just the way their schedules are. And then I'll kind of have a hot sheet, I call it, where guys might have a little more leeway to get away. And I'll call, just kind of hit the list if I have openings and tell them like, hey, it could be good in the next day or two. And then they go, yeah, I can make it. And I'm like, all right, let's get it down. But I'm really picky in the winter. I've done this long enough that you can really burn somebody out on winter steelheading if you go on the wrong day. Yeah. And so I'm depending on the person that books the trip, I will tell them that we will try to hit the best conditions we can, and I might cancel on them twice.
Yeah.
And it's on me. I'm like, nope, you don't want to go on this. Yeah. It's 35 degrees. It's raining. That's not when you want to start your winter steelhead experience.
No.
That's going to be miserable. Even if the water's perfect, you do not want to go on this.
No.
So, and then there's other guys that just thrive on that stuff, so it's kind of a tough call. Sometimes I should have went maybe and I didn't, but I want to make it fun. I want to make it that they want to go do that. So, I'm kind of probably one of the pickiest probably on some occasions on winter steelheading, but
that's cool.
You kind of have to be.
Yeah. So how long? So you take us back. You mentioned, I think you were a teenager when you were guiding. From that first trip till now, how long have you been guiding?
I think it's like 35 years.
35, yeah. So what is your plan? Or do you have a plan on? It sounds like you just love guiding. You're gonna, because I hear different stories about people that, kind of they love. There's a Davey Watton who's back in the kind of the white in Arkansas, and I mean, he's an older guy, definitely an older guy. And he still guides like, I don't know, 250, 300 days a year or something like that. And so it's amazing. Some of these people have the ability, but some don't, right? I mean, what's your take on all that?
Right. Some people get burnt out. Some people don't realize that guiding is not fishing. Like, I don't fish a lot,
Right.
I mean, I still get out on my own, but I kind of knew guiding was giving up my fishing to teach other people something you already loved, something you already thought was the greatest thing ever. Like, it was easy for me. Like, man, I want to get more people involved in this. Like, this is a great sport, and I think a lot more people should be out here doing this. And so that's the way I think of it. And yeah, after all this time, I would never thought I could make a career, because in the beginning it was just like, you did it in the summer, then you had to have some kind of job. I mean, I would be going to college or whatever, or I worked at Larry's Sports Center.
Oh yeah.
Here's another Larry's guy that worked at Larry's Sports Center for a while.
Yeah.
Basically fished every day and then would work at Larry's, but yeah, I mean, it's surprising how I'm always surprised. It's hard work. I mean, you can make a living at it, but it's not easy. Like a lot of, self-employed people, there's moments where you're like, man, I should be on the river, and you're not. And then there's other times you're like, wow, I'm really busy.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah.
So, some people get burnt out on it. I think it's because they just don't get to fish enough. They kind of lost their fishing and just get burnt out on people that, can't cast and can't do what they want them to do. And to me, it just motivates me to get them going without like yelling at them. I hear all sorts of horror stories. I think are horror stories of guides like, no, you're doing it wrong.
Oh, wow.
Give me that rod, kind of a thing. Like, whoa, like I would never do that. It's like, no, here's how you do it, and like try to make it fun.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Like even if you're not catching them, like, here, check this out, cast this way. So, but no, it's not for everybody. I definitely agree. It's definitely not for everybody. And I don't know how much longer I'll do it, but I'm going to keep doing it as long as I possibly can.
There you go. Perfect. And would you have a tip for a new guide? What would you tell somebody that's wanting to get into it or is just starting?
A new guide, well, it's always tough. I mean, if they have no home river that they really want to work on, there is guide schools that can kind of help them, point them in the right direction, which at one time I thought were kind of funny, to have a guide school, but that gets their foot in the door, or working at a fly shop. I mean, that's another way to get a foot in the door. That's how I kind of got into it, was kind of hanging out in a fly shop, being a fly shop rat, basically, just hanging out, being, casting in the back parking lot, that kind of stuff, and starting to meet the reps and other people. And, but really, I get emails off and on about guys that want to be a guide. And I'm like, well, where do you live? Well, I live here. I'm like, well, what's your favorite river? And like, oh, I fish this river. I'm like, well, do you fish it all the time? And like, well, yeah, like I would fish that as where every inch of it. Yeah. Like fish everything you would want to know about it, and then try to work with a fly shop or maybe even start your own business. It's definitely hard. I mean, I probably wouldn't want to go through it again myself, because there was times I would take anybody for anything. Sure. Just because I had my guide license, and I was like, man, I got nothing, other than the trickle down what I could get from somewhere. So it's definitely not easy, but I think most guides anymore would have to work either for an outfitter or a fly shop, or do the guide school where they can set you up on maybe go guide in Alaska for a few years, where you can build some clientele or meet some people and work from there. Yeah. But it's definitely not easy to start.
That's perfect. Yeah, I'll put a link in the show. I interviewed the person running the Sweetwater guide school out there in Montana a while back. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And
that would be a great resource right there. Those guys do a really good job from what I can see.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, they mentioned that. I can't remember exactly, but I mean, they pretty much guarantee a job. I mean, it's, if you want to do it, it's literally almost 100%. They'll find you something. So it's
right. They have that. Yeah, they fill up a lot of the lodges and a lot of places in Alaska with those guys that just came out of there, and which is perfect for some of those rivers where you don't have a lot of people, and sometimes not the pressure and not the amount of guides you can have in some of our rivers sometimes.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. Hey, do you have a bucket? I'm not sure how much destination type fishing you do, but do you have a bucket list spot you want to hit or species?
Oh man, I got, everybody's got a bucket list. You know, I did do one. I went to Christmas Island about 4 years ago.
Cool.
And that was kind of one of my. Everybody talks about Christmas Island, and that was really. I hosted a trip. That was really fun to do something like that. Any saltwater, like that. That just like I love that kind of stuff because being a winter steelhead, kind of guy, or living out in Oregon, you go somewhere tropical. It's perfect. It's pretty neat, and it seems like those fish eat anything you throw at them most of the time.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
From what I can see, what I experienced. So that was, you still have some tough situations, but that would be pretty fun. But my other one is golden Dorado. Yeah, I would love to do that somewhere because those seem like really fun, visual kind of eating, chasing things and stuff like that. But I would go to a steelhead river in BC. I haven't fished, maybe even two. There's so many options. It's hard to choose. We had a trip scheduled to go to the Skeena with some guys, me and Marty, and the whole COVID thing.
Oh, no kidding!
Kind of shot that down.
Yeah. Dang.
We were going to go the end of April, 1st of March to fish the Skeena.
Yep.
We tried a few years ago to do that, and it was blown out. So we were hoping to do it a little earlier, and it didn't.
Yeah.
Didn't work out. So
I'm going to let you get out of here. Any in the next kind of 6 to 12 months, anything new coming up for you, or your business, anything you want to give a shout out to?
Well, just big work in trout fishing. Still have some openings for some summer trout fishing, and then going to early steelheading. So that's what I'll be working on.
Are the summer trout? Are you pretty much just hitting the Deschutes, doing?
Yeah, just doing the Deschutes, kind of looking for the caddis, dry fly fishing stuff.
What's your go-to? It was probably not easy, but if you had to say a dry fly, or what do you fish mostly, or what's your most common for trout?
Elk-haired caddis.
Yeah, elk-haired, I know.
Tan-bodied elk-haired caddis, size 14, 16, maybe an 18. That's like the go-to for me forever. You can't beat that. That's one of the greatest dry flies. I have some of my own, but that's still one of the greatest dry flies. And then one of my caddis pupas, it's a beadhead caddis pupa, is one of my other favorites for, sunk hopper dropper style is what I fish a lot too.
Yeah. That's it. It's silveysflyfishing.com if they want to track you down or book a trip with you.
Yeah. You can get me on my website or even Instagram, just Brian Silvey or Silvey's Fly Fishing. You can find me on there too.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'll put links to all that in the show notes and put that out there. So, yeah, I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing some tips here. We've, there's with the John Day, I never get tired. It's funny. Obviously, it's my home river, the Deschutes and stuff. I never get tired of talking about it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, the stories and connecting you now to, Bachman and that whole thing, right? You're part of that. I appreciate you sharing everything today and coming on and talking a little fishing.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll talk to you later.
Okay.
So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes, all the links we covered, just go to wetflyswing.com/148. Could you share this episode with one other person who would love the show? It would be great if you could reach out and let somebody know. I'm definitely shooting for the 50-50 eventually, along with Orvis. So it'd be great if you know a person in the female variety. That would even be better. And finally, go over to outdoorsonline.co. Head over there right now and click play. That's outdoors with an S. And help the journey I'm on there in the parallel universe, I guess you could call it. I've got some good stuff going, so I'd appreciate it if you had a chance to stop on by, and if it looks like something interesting, maybe you could share it out there with the world. Thanks again for stopping by today to check out the show. I'm looking forward to catching up with you soon and maybe seeing you on the river online.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.